Mariana's life had always been a struggle, marked by loneliness and hardship. But when a job as a nurse to a terminally ill millionaire named Mr. Alencar came her way, her world was about to change forever. What began as a simple caregiving job quickly evolved into something much more profound when Mr. Alencar asked Mariana to pretend to be his daughter for a day. This unusual request carried with it secrets that neither Mariana nor Mr. Alencar were prepared for. With his health rapidly declining and his wife Elena harboring dark intentions, Mariana found herself at the center of a battle for life, legacy, and family. But just when all hope seemed lost, a shocking revelation came to light, one that would not only save Mr. Alencar's life also gives Mariana the family she had always dreamed of. As their bond grew, they both found healing in a way they never expected, and together, they forged a new path filled with love, hope, and the promise of a brighter future. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Mariana sat at the small kitchen table, surrounded by a sea of unpaid bills and endless job listings. The air in the room felt heavy with the weight of her solitude and the overwhelming burden of responsibility. At just 28 years old, Mariana was a nurse whose inner strength and resolve starkly contrasted with her outward fragility. Her light brown hair framed a face adorned with piercing green eyes that reflected a soul full of compassion and an unwavering desire to care for others. Life had not been kind to her. She had grown up in an orphanage, utterly alone, with no family to lean on. Every step she had taken in life was one she had forged on her own. And now, she found herself at a crossroads, her spirit heavy with the realization that she had no one but herself to rely on. "I have to find work soon," she whispered into the silence, her fingers trembling as they traced the edges of job listings that had yet to bear any fruit. For days, relentless dizziness had plagued her, a physical manifestation of the fragility she could no longer ignore. Yet, without the funds to seek medical help, she knew that securing a job was not just a need, it was a matter of survival. As if the universe had finally decided to show her some mercy, her phone rang, breaking the oppressive quiet of the room. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number, but desperation had a way of turning the unknown into hope. She answered, her heart pounding with the possibility that this call might be the lifeline she had been waiting for. "Good afternoon. My name is Elena," came the voice on the other end, authoritative and unmistakably poised. "I need a nurse to care for my husband. Your name was recommended to us." The words were like a balm to Mariana's anxious heart. It had been so long since she had worked as a nurse, taking on any odd job she could find to make ends meet. "I don't recall applying for this position," she replied, her voice betraying the desperation she fought to conceal. "But I'm very interested in working as a caregiver." Elena cut her off, her tone brisk and to the point. "It was my husband, Mr. Alencar, who heard about your services. We require someone with your expertise immediately. Can you come to the mansion today for an interview?" Mariana could hardly believe her luck. "Yes, of course. I'll be there," she responded, trying to keep her voice steady despite the excitement bubbling inside her. When she arrived at the Grand Alencar mansion, Mariana was met by Elena, a woman whose rigid posture and cool demeanor left little room for warmth. Throughout the interview, Elena's apparent lack of genuine concern for her ailing husband unnerved Mariana. Mr. Alencar, she learned, had been diagnosed with a rare and terminal illness, his days reportedly numbered. Yet Elena dismissed the severity of his condition with a wave of her hand as if the doctors had exaggerated their diagnosis. "I'm sure it's not as bad as they say," Elena remarked, her tone almost indifferent. A wave of compassion washed over Mariana for the man she had yet to meet. The way Elena spoke about her husband, as though his life were of little consequence, unsettled her deeply. "I'm truly sorry to hear about his condition. If possible, I'd like to meet Mr. Alencar," Mariana said, her heart aching with the thought that this woman might be incapable of caring for him in his most vulnerable state. As she awaited Elena's response, she silently hoped that her initial impression was wrong, that there was more to Elena than the cold exterior she presented. Just as Mariana was about to continue her conversation with Elena, a man dressed in gardener's clothes mistakenly entered the room, disrupting the tense atmosphere. Elena's reaction was immediate and harsh. Her face twisted in disgust as she snapped, "Can't you see we're busy? Get out of here, immediately." The gardener's face flushed with embarrassment as his shoulders slumped under the weight of the reprimand. "I'm sorry, Elena. This won't happen again," he muttered apologetically, his eyes catching Mariana's compassionate gaze before he hastily retreated. Mariana felt a pang of discomfort at the way Elena treated the man. She looked at the gardener with pity but refocused her attention on her primary concern, Mr. Alencar. A sense of urgency gripped her heart. She needed to see him for herself, to ensure that this cold woman wasn't neglecting him behind closed doors. "Please," Mariana insisted, her voice firm but polite. "I believe I must see Mr. Alencar right away." Reluctantly, Elena led her to his room. Mariana barely had time to introduce herself when the sight before her made her heart drop. Mr. Alencar was lying in bed, his frail body racked with violent coughing fits. His face had turned a ghostly shade of white, and he was desperately gasping for air. Without hesitation, Mariana rushed to his side. She adjusted his position, trying to ease his labored breathing, and gently patted his back. "He's not breathing properly," she whispered, her mind racing as she took control of the situation. With great care, she turned him slightly, fearing that the man was on the brink of death. She began administering chest compressions, her hands moving rhythmically until, at last, Mr. Alencar let out a gasp and started breathing again. Mariana exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, deeply relieved that she had arrived just in time to prevent a tragedy. "Are you feeling better now?" she asked gently, her concern evident as she looked into his pale, worn face. Mr. Alencar, still catching his breath, managed a weak but grateful smile. You have angelic hands." "Thank you," he murmured, his voice fragile but full of sincerity. The man was painfully thin, his skin almost translucent, as if he hadn't been receiving the care he so desperately needed. His green eyes, though tired, seemed to study Mariana with a sense of gratitude that ran deeper than words could express. As he continued to recover from the scare, Mariana couldn't help but wonder if he was being properly fed, or if his condition had worsened due to neglect. The thought made her stomach churn, but she pushed it aside, refusing to jump to conclusions about Elena. "I'm glad you're all right, Mr. Alencar," she replied with a soft smile, her voice warm and reassuring. From the doorway, Elena watched the scene unfold, her expression unreadable but her body tense with discomfort. "Well, it seems you've done something useful, Mariana," Elena remarked, though her tone lacked genuine praise. Instead, it carried an undercurrent of irritation, almost as if she had hoped for a different outcome. "But I can take care of my husband on my own. He's improving. This was just a minor accident," she added dismissively, her words carrying a hint of dismissal as she waved off the seriousness of the situation. But Mr. Alencar wasn't having any of it. With a sudden burst of energy fueled by frustration, he turned to his wife, his voice laced with anger. "I still have a say in this house," he declared, his eyes blazing with indignation. "Mariana saved my life, and I want her to be my nurse." He turned back to Mariana, his voice softening as he looked at her with pleading eyes. "Please accept the job. I need someone like you by my side." Mariana felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She had come to the Alencar mansion seeking nothing more than a job. But now, standing in front of a man who had just fought for his life and for the right to choose his care, she realized that this opportunity was far more than just employment. It was a chance to make a difference, to be the compassionate presence that Mr. Alencar so desperately needed. "Of course," she responded, her voice filled with a renewed sense of purpose. "I'll stay." Although relieved that she had managed to help, Mariana couldn't shake off the heaviness of the situation. The room felt tense, filled with unspoken concerns. "I'll do everything I can for Mr. Alencar," she assured them, her voice steady as she glanced at Elena, whose demeanor remained cold and detached. "Considering his condition, I think it's best if I take a full-time position," Mariana continued. "If there's a room available, even a small one, I can stay close to him. I don't need much. Honestly, even this chair would be enough," she added, her words tinged with concern not only for his breathing but for the underlying tension she sensed from his wife. Mr. Alencar, grateful and visibly worn, responded with a faint smile. "Stay as long as you need, Mariana," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. He then turned towards his wife, his expression firm despite his frailty. "Elena, make sure she is accommodated in our finest guest room. It's the least we can do for what she's done for me," he ordered, his tone brooking no argument. Weeks passed, and Mariana became familiar with the daily routine of caring for Mr. Alencar. Yet, each day she noticed herself feeling weaker, her strength ebbing away like sand slipping through her fingers. "I need to earn more money to see a doctor," she thought to herself, anxiety creeping into her mind. "Maybe I can find a side job on my days off." But every time she considered stepping away, the image of Mr. Alencar's pale face came to mind, and she knew she couldn't abandon him, not when he was so dependent on her care. "I'll take care of myself once he gets better," she resolved, even though deep down, she worried that day might never come. As she walked through the vast and imposing mansion, the weight of her deteriorating health pressed on her shoulders. Carrying a tray of vital medications and medical instructions, she moved with quiet determination. The corridors echoed her footsteps, lonely and cold, much like the atmosphere of the house. Although she meticulously followed every instruction from the doctors, Mr. Alencar seemed to grow weaker with each passing day, just as she did. But somehow, it was in his frailty that she found the strength to keep going. "He needs me," she whispered to herself as she struggled up the staircase, pushing through the dizziness that clouded her vision. When Mariana entered the expansive room, she found Mr. Alencar just finishing a phone call. His voice, barely more than a whisper, carried a tremor of urgency that made her pause. The lines of worry etched deeply into his face were unmistakable. Whatever conversation he had just finished had unsettled him. As soon as he hung up, his tired green eyes locked onto hers, filled with a sense of dread. With a heaviness in his voice, he spoke words that sent a chill down her spine. This might be my last day," he said, the gravity of his statement hanging in the air like a dark cloud. Mariana felt her breath catch, her heart quickening as the weight of his words settled over her. She quickly set the tray of medications beside the bed, trying to absorb the seriousness of the moment. He continued, each word seemingly costing him a great effort. "There's something very important that I need you to do," he whispered, his gaze pleading. Before she could ask what he meant, something on the tray caught her eye. An unfamiliar vial, one she hadn't seen before. It wasn't listed among the usual medications she administered, and 2 sealed envelopes lay next to it, drawing her attention. Her heart skipped a beat as a sense of foreboding washed over her. She knew the routine inside and out, memorizing every document, every prescription, and this vial had certainly not been there before. Elena always left the prescribed medications from the doctors for her to administer, and Mariana knew them all by heart. "What's this?" she asked, her voice laced with curiosity and concern, holding up the vial as she turned to Mr. Alencar. "I don't recall any changes in your medication." The question lingered between them, the air thick with unease. Mr. Alencar followed Mariana's gaze to the unfamiliar vial and documents on the tray. His voice trembled with urgency as he hurried to explain. "That medication, along with those papers, is tied to what comes next. A trusted friend left them here at my request," he said weakly, his words loaded with a weight that Mariana couldn't yet fully understand. A surge of conflicting emotions rushed through her. Confusion, concern, but most of all, a deep sense of determination. She had come to care for this man, far beyond the duties of her job. "Is there something more I can do for you, Mr. Alencar?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm, her heart silently promising him the loyalty he so desperately needed. "Your well-being is all that matters to me." In the weeks since she had started working at the mansion, Mariana had grown increasingly attached to Mr. Alencar. Despite their limited conversations, his medication often leaving him too weak to talk, She found herself drawn to his kindness and the quiet strength that lingered beneath his frailty. She was profoundly grateful for this job, but more than that, she felt a growing affection for him, as if fate had intertwined their paths for a reason. Mr. Alencar, attempting to raise his hand in a gesture of gratitude, found himself too weak to complete the motion, his fingers trembling before falling back to the bed. "Mariana," he began, his voice breaking with emotion, "you've already brought light to my darkest days, but there is something more, one last favor I need to ask of you." He paused, struggling to catch his breath, his eyes pleading with her to understand the importance of his request. "Please pretend to be my daughter. I can't bear the thought of leaving this world without." He couldn't finish his sentence as a violent cough overtook him, the sound rattling through his frail body. Mariana rushed to his side, her heart aching at the sight of his suffering. She gently placed a hand on his arm, trying to calm him. "Please, I need you to pretend that I'm your father, just for one day," he whispered, his voice filled with desperation. The intensity of his plea left Mariana struggling to understand the full gravity of his request. "Why are you asking me this, Mr. Alencar?" she asked softly, confusion clouding her mind. "You're going to be all right. I have faith that you'll recover," she added, though she could feel the fragile thread of hope slipping through her fingers. But Mr. Alencar shook his head, his voice barely more than a whisper now. "Mariana, this is my last request. I don't have much time left," he said, his words a stark contrast to her hopeful reassurances. Another wave of coughing racked his body, and Mariana instinctively moved closer, her nurturing instincts taking over as she tended to him. "All right," she said, her voice catching in her throat. "I'll pretend, Mr. Alencar, or should I say Dad?" she added with a soft smile, trying to lighten the heavy atmosphere, though her heart ached with sorrow. She knew he had no one else, no one but her, and in that moment, she felt an unspoken bond form between them, a connection stronger than any words could convey. Before Mr. Alencar could fully explain the reason behind his unusual request or the significance of the new medication, the door to the room suddenly swung open with a sharp creak. Elena, his wife, strode in with a sense of purpose, her heels clicking against the floor with each determined step. Behind her, a man dressed in an impeccably tailored suit followed closely, his expression neutral but alert. "It's time, Alencar," Elena said, her sharp voice cutting through the room like a blade, shattering the fragile intimacy that had just enveloped them. "You need to sign the will. I've brought the lawyer to ensure everything is done properly," she added, her tone brusque and businesslike, as though her husband's deteriorating condition was nothing more than an inconvenience to her plans. Mariana, sensing the tension in the room rising like a storm, instinctively stepped back, her eyes flickering between Elena, the lawyer, and Mr. Alencar. She cast one final questioning glance at him, her mind racing with unanswered questions. Is this why he asked me to pretend to be his daughter? So he wouldn't be forced into signing these documents? She wondered, her heart pounding in her chest. But before she could voice her concerns, Mr. Alencar's condition took a sudden turn for the worse. He began coughing violently, his breaths coming in short, labored gasps. Elena, ever the cold strategist, turned her gaze back to her husband, her expression one of calculated urgency. "Alencar, you need to sign these papers now. It's crucial," she pressed, her voice unwavering as she pushed the will toward him, the edges of the documents trembling slightly in her firm grip. Mr. Alencar, despite his frail condition, gazed at Elena with a clarity that belied his physical state. His eyes, filled with a mix of sadness and understanding, seemed to pierce through her cold demeanor. "Elena," he whispered, his voice barely audible, each word a struggle against the pain in his chest. "Even now, in this moment, is this all that matters to you?" His voice was thick with disgust, tinged with a deep sorrow that cut through the air like a knife. Mariana, feeling a wave of dizziness wash over her, fought to remain upright. "I can't pass out now," she thought, her focus snapping back to Mr. Alencar just as the medical monitors around them began to blare out alarms. The steady rhythm of his heartbeat had become erratic, a terrifying sign that something had gone wrong. "What's happening?" Mariana's voice was thick with fear as she rushed to his side, her hands moving instinctively to tend to him. The urgency of the moment erased any thoughts of her failing health, her mind singularly focused on saving him. But Elena, seemingly unmoved by the alarms, stepped even closer to her husband, her expression hard and unyielding. "It doesn't matter," she said, her voice icy as she thrust the papers toward him once more. "You need to sign now." Her words were relentless, pushing him toward the brink, ignoring the frantic beeping that signaled the impending disaster. Mr. Alencar, summoning what little strength remained within him, attempted to lift his hand toward the documents, but his body betrayed him. His vision blurred, and the weight of unconsciousness began to pull him under. "Elena, His voice trailed off as his hand fell limply to his side, his head slumping as his body gave in to the overwhelming exhaustion. Panic surged through Mariana as she rushed to grab the resuscitation device, her training kicking in as she prepared for the worst. "He's going into shock," she cried, turning to Elena with eyes filled with both a plea for help and a silent accusation. "This can wait. I need to help him now." Her voice was sharp with urgency, but Elena's cold indifference remained unshaken. But the damage had already been done. Elena's unrelenting demands had pushed Mr. Alencar to the edge, and now Mariana found herself fighting to pull him back from the brink. Her mind raced, the thought repeating over and over, "I need to save him." Desperation clung to her every movement as she tried to stabilize his condition, her hands trembling with both fear and resolve. In a sudden, cruel twist, Elena reached out and shoved Mariana away, her forceful push sending the resuscitation device crashing to the floor, where it shattered into useless pieces. "Get out of the room now," Elena hissed, her voice venomous as she pointed toward the door. "You're the one who put him in this state. He was fine before you arrived," she accused, her words dripping with blame and fury. But Mariana wasn't about to back down. Despite Elena's harsh commands, a greater force seemed to guide her actions, something deeper than fear or obedience. A force rooted in her unwavering belief that she could still save him. "I don't need that," Mariana murmured to herself, but loud enough for Elena to hear. Her voice was firm, unshakable in its determination, even as Elena's presence loomed like a dark storm threatening to drown out her hope. "He's dying," she thought, but the truth of it only fueled her resolve. She couldn't let Mr. Alencar leave this world like this, not without a fight. With hands that trembled both from exhaustion and desperation, Mariana reached for the unlisted medication on the tray. It was a gamble, a decision made at the height of her despair, but she couldn't stand by and do nothing. "Mr. Alencar, please," she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet intensity as she administered the unknown vial. "Stay with me. Don't leave yet," she pleaded, her words a fragile thread of hope in the face of impending darkness. As she worked, she prayed that her actions, her presence, would be enough to keep him tethered to life, if only for a little longer. Elena stared at Mariana with a mix of disbelief and outrage as the nurse's audacious actions unfolded before her eyes. "What do you think you're doing? Get your hands off my husband now," she commanded, but despite the authoritative tone, her voice wavered with a hint of fear. Mariana, however, was too focused on the fragile life that hung in the balance to pay much attention. Mr. Alencar, a man who had built a vast pharmaceutical empire, should have had access to the finest medications in the world. But now, in the height of desperation, Mariana realized that this injection might be the last chance to save him. His heart was failing, his life slipping away, and so she made the decision. This was the only option left. As she administered the medication, time seemed to stretch into eternity. Each second felt like an hour as she watched Mr. Alencar closely, her heart pounding in her chest, searching for any sign that her desperate gamble had worked. But instead of the miracle she had so desperately hoped for, she watched in horror as his condition worsened. His breathing, already shallow and labored, became erratic. His face grew even paler, the color draining from his skin until he looked almost ghostly. "This isn't happening," Mariana whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of the realization crashing down on her. She had only wanted to help, but now everything seemed to be spiraling out of control. With shaking hands, she pressed the emergency button she had insisted on having installed weeks earlier, her mind racing with fear and regret. Despite the dire situation, Elena's focus remained unwavering, consumed by her obsession with the will. Even as her husband's life hung in the balance, she attempted to retrieve the documents from the bedside table. But Mariana, now standing between Elena and Mr. Alencar, blocked her path, her expression a mixture of sorrow and determination. "You have to understand, Elena," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. "Right now, his life is more important than any piece of paper. Please, let me do my job." Elena's face contorted with frustration and desperation as she tried to push past Mariana. "I will not let this chance slip away," she cried, her voice teetering on the edge of hysteria. "He has to sign." The desperation in her voice was palpable, a mixture of anger and fear driving her actions. But before the conflict could escalate further, the door burst open and a team of medical professionals rushed in, responding to Mariana's emergency call. They swiftly took over, their calm efficiency in stark contrast to the chaotic emotions swirling in the room. They worked quickly, stabilizing Mr. Alencar as best as they could and preparing him for transport to the hospital. Elena, her face pale with shock, stood frozen, unable to fully comprehend the gravity of the situation. As Mr. Alencar was whisked away, Mariana remained at his side, her heart heavy with both worry and regret. The emotional toll of the day weighed on her, but she knew she couldn't abandon him now. He needed her more than ever, and despite everything, she was determined to see him through this. Mariana, filled with a mix of exhaustion and determination, pushed forward despite the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. The events that had unfolded left her grappling with emotions she couldn't quite name: loss, confusion, and a nagging sense of guilt that wouldn't let go. She had acted out of compassion, trying to help a man who had become more than just a patient to her. He had become a beacon of hope amid her struggles, a symbol of something good and pure in a world that often felt so dark. And yet, now she was left questioning herself, unsure if her actions had caused more harm than good. The days following Mr. Alencar's collapse were filled with reflection. Mariana couldn't stop thinking about the moral dilemmas she had faced and the decisions she had made in those critical moments. She wondered whether she had honored Mr. Alencar's wishes, or if she had somehow failed him when he needed her most. The uncertainty of his fate weighed heavily on her, casting a shadow over everything else. As she arrived at the hospital, weak and dizzy from her worsening condition, Mariana knew Elena would never have allowed her to accompany the ambulance. But she couldn't stay away. She needed to know what had happened to Mr. Alencar, to be there for him, even if she wasn't sure what role she could play anymore. Taking slow, deliberate steps, she made her way to the taxi stand and hailed a cab, her body barely able to keep up with her mind's resolve. Inside the cab, she tried to rest, gathering what little strength she had left. Her eyes fell on her coat, where the unopened envelopes rested. "Please, God, let there be something useful here," she whispered, her voice a quiet plea as she clutched them tightly. Breaking the seal of the envelope, Mariana's hands trembled as she unfolded the papers inside. What she found was completely unexpected. A paternity test confirming that Mr. Alencar had a child he didn't know about. More shocking was the detailed medical report that revealed this child suffered from the same rare disease that was now threatening his life. But the documents offered no clues, no name, no information on how she could find this mysterious child. Who could it be? She murmured to herself, her anxiety deepening with every second. Arriving at the hospital, Mariana approached the receptionist with a mixture of desperation and determination. "I need to see one of the patients. His name is Alencar," she said, her voice barely masking the urgency she felt. But the receptionist, ever the professional, responded with a sympathetic yet firm tone. "I'm sorry, but only family members can see him right now." Mariana hesitated, her heart racing as she weighed her options. The memory of Mr. Alencar's request to pretend to be his daughter resurfaced, and a risky decision began to form in her mind. The paternity test papers were still in her hand, and although they didn't specify the gender of the child, they could be her key. Taking a deep breath, she lay, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "I'm his daughter. These papers prove it. I need to see him. It's urgent." She handed the documents to the receptionist, praying that her desperation wouldn't show. The receptionist, after a glance at the papers, seemed convinced. She nodded and allowed Mariana access to the room where Mr. Alencar was being treated. "Follow me, please," the receptionist instructed, leading Mariana down hallways that seemed to stretch on endlessly, each step echoing her internal conflict. As she walked, the weight of her decision to lie pressed heavily on her conscience. "What am I doing?" she wondered, the reality of her deception gnawing at her resolve. Yet, the overpowering need to be by Mr. Alencar's side in his most critical moment, to honor the silent promise she had made to him, propelled her forward despite her doubts. When they finally arrived at the room where Mr. Alencar was being treated, Mariana hesitated at the door, her heart pounding with fear of what she might find. She took a deep breath, summoning the courage to enter. The sight that greeted her was heart-wrenching. Mr. Alencar lay in the hospital bed, connected to a web of machines, their rhythmic beeps a constant reminder of how fragile life truly was. His once strong presence was now diminished, his body frail and intubated, barely recognizable. A doctor stood beside the bed, quietly recording the patient's condition on a clipboard. Mariana approached slowly, her heart heavy with a mix of pain and guilt. She could barely find her voice as she whispered, "Mr. Alencar, it's me, Mariana. I came as soon as I could." She knew there would be no response, but the coldness of his hand against hers made her swallow hard, a painful reminder of the man's request for her to pretend to be his daughter. "I'm his daughter. Can you tell me his condition?" she asked the doctor, forcing herself to lie once more. The words felt bitter on her tongue, but she knew it was necessary to stay close to him. The doctor looked at her with a sympathetic gaze, then sighed before responding. "Mr. Alencar is in a deep coma. Given his condition, it's unlikely he will survive until the end of the day." Each word hit Mariana like a physical blow, the doctor's prognosis echoing in the emptiness that suddenly seemed to fill her chest. The reality of how close Mr. Alencar was to death became painfully clear, and the enormity of the situation left her reeling. "He can't go like this," she thought desperately, feeling the urgency to fulfill her promise more than ever. Turning to the doctor, she made a quiet request, her voice strained with emotion. "I need to be alone with him, with my father." The doctor, perhaps sensing the depth of her need, nodded and left the room, leaving Mariana alone with the man who had come to mean so much to her. Mariana slowly sat in the chair beside the bed, the sound of the machines filling the silence between them. "Mr. Alencar, I didn't forget my promise," she began, her voice trembling as tears welled up in her eyes. I will fulfill your last wish, just as you asked. Today, I will be your daughter." She held his hand tightly, her tears now flowing freely as she continued. "If we were father and daughter, we would spend a day at the beach, free from all this pain and suffering. We'd share stories, laugh together, and enjoy the warmth of the sun. We'd have a morning of strength and joy, and end the afternoon with coffee by the sea. That would be our perfect day," she finished, her words imbued with a mix of hope and sadness. Mariana's voice softened, her heart breaking as she offered him a glimpse of the happiness they could have shared. "I just want you to know," she whispered, "that you weren't alone in the end. You were loved, even if only for a day." She sat there, holding his hand, her tears falling as she quietly painted a picture of a day that would never come, a dream that would live on only in her words. The door to the room suddenly burst open, shattering the quiet moment between Mariana and Mr. Alencar. Elena's entrance was like a cold wind blowing through the room, her presence immediately bringing with it an icy, calculating energy. She fixed her gaze on Mariana with evident disdain, her eyes narrowing in anger. "What do you think you're doing here?" Elena demanded, her voice sharp and commanding, echoing through the room. "I thought it was Clara, but it seems she has comprehension issues. You're dismissed, Mariana. Leave my husband," she ordered, her words cutting through the air despite the fatigue and weakness that seemed to weigh her down. Mariana, though still drained and weak, found a reserve of strength deep within her. She stood up, her legs trembling slightly but her resolve firm. "You can't dismiss me," she said, meeting Elena's cold gaze with determination. "I'm his daughter." It was a lie, one she knew was fraught with danger, but it was the only way to stay by Mr. Alencar's side. She struggled to pull out the envelope, her hands shaking as she did so, but she knew she had no other choice. If she left now, she would be abandoning him to the care of a woman who seemed to wish for nothing more than his death. Elena was not taken aback by the revelation, nor by the blatant lie. Instead, she let out a cold, disdainful laugh, a sound that felt out of place in a room where life and death hung in the balance. "You, his daughter? That's absurd. Look at you, your appearance, your clothes. You could never be part of our family?" Elena sneered, her voice dripping with contempt. Each word was like a knife, cutting into Mariana's already fragile sense of self-worth. But she did not back down. "No matter what you think," Mariana said, summoning every last bit of strength she had, "I'm staying here. He's not alone." The tension between the two women was palpable, the air thick with animosity. But before the argument could escalate further, the medical team arrived, responding to Elena's summons. "This woman is disturbing the peace of the patient. I demand that she be removed immediately," Elena ordered, pointing a finger at Mariana, her voice cold and imperious. Mariana, feeling a wave of dizziness wash over her, fought to stay upright. But the exhaustion and stress were too much. As she collapsed to the floor, her last conscious thought was of Mr. Alencar. Just before darkness claimed her, she saw something miraculous. His fingers moved, a slight twitch that was enough to send a jolt of hope through her. "He's moving," she murmured weakly, her voice barely audible as the doctors rushed to her side. But Elena's voice cut through the haze of her fading consciousness. "Ignore her. This girl is nothing but a nuisance. She can't even afford to pay for her services?" Elena sneered, her words the last thing Mariana heard before everything went black. When Mariana finally regained consciousness, she found herself in a dimly lit hospital room. The walls were unfamiliar, and as she slowly blinked against the bright lights overhead, memories of what had happened came flooding back. "Where am I? What happened to Mr. Alencar?" she thought, panic briefly rising in her chest. But as she looked around, she realized this wasn't the same hospital where she had left Mr. Alencar. The sheets were softer, the air less sterile, and the room had an odd sense of calm about it. "No doubt they moved me because they know I can't afford to stay," she thought bitterly. Despite the uncertainty, she noticed that her muscles no longer ached as they had before. The physical relief was welcome, but it did little to ease her mind. The questions swirling in her head were relentless. What had happened to Mr. Alencar after she lost consciousness? Had he survived? And what of Elena? Had she finally succeeded in her cold, calculated mission? Mariana took a deep breath, willing herself to gather the strength to find out the answers she so desperately needed. Mariana could feel the strength in her body as she easily sat up in bed, a stark contrast to the weakness she had felt before. It was as if a new life had been breathed into her. She pressed the call button, hoping to summon a doctor or nurse, her mind racing with questions about what had happened to Mr. Alencar. Soon, a well-dressed man entered the room, his presence calm and reassuring. He approached her with a broad smile. "Mariana, I'm glad to see you awake. I'm Dr. Enrique." He introduced himself, coming closer to her bedside. Mariana's concern for Mr. Alencar overshadowed everything else. "Dr. Enrique, how is Mr. Alencar? I need to know," she asked, her voice laced with urgency. Dr. Enrique offered her a reassuring smile. Everything will be explained soon. The doctor in charge of your care is on his way to see you, he replied, his tone calm but not dismissive. Mariana's anxiety, however, only grew with each passing moment. She couldn't help but feel a deep gratitude toward Dr. Enrique. I have to thank you for everything you did for my friend Alencar. You sacrificed your health so he could be treated. People like you are rare, she said, her voice filled with genuine appreciation. Before Dr. Enrique could respond, another doctor entered the room, immediately shifting the focus to her health. He examined the monitors displaying her vital signs and spoke with a sense of satisfaction. You're in excellent health thanks to the medication, he said, his eyes on the readouts. Mariana, still grappling with her situation, voiced her concern. I can't afford treatment at this hospital, she admitted, her voice tinged with worry. I'm unemployed at the moment, she added, thinking about her uncertain future and hoping that Mr. Alencar was in good hands with another nurse. Dr. Enrique stepped in to calm her fears. Don't worry about the bills. They've been paid in full by Mr. Alencar, he informed her, his tone warm and reassuring. Mariana's eyes widened in surprise. Mr. Alencar paid for my treatment? She asked, unable to hide her disbelief. Yes, Dr. Enrique confirmed with a nod. He made sure everything was taken care of while you were in the hospital. His wife, Elena, also covered the cost of your medications. He paused, letting the news sink in before continuing. Mr. Alencar is fine now, and Elena has agreed to follow your instructions for his recovery. Your dedication truly saved him, Mariana. A wave of relief washed over Mariana. I did my best for him, she said softly, a sense of fulfillment settling over her as she realized she had done everything possible for Mr. Alencar's recovery. The knowledge that he was on the mend lightened the burden that had weighed so heavily on her heart. As she prepared to leave the hospital, a sense of achievement filled her, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the unresolved mystery of the child from the paternity test. What will become of the mysterious child? She wondered, knowing deep down that her journey was far from over. Driven by a profound sense of justice and hope, Mariana resolved to continue her search to uncover the identity of Mr. Alencar's child. She knew that her mission and her purpose were not yet complete. As Mariana stepped into the quiet room, Dr. Enrique greeted her warmly with a gentle smile. I'll check back later, he said, his voice calm yet purposeful. I need to oversee a project the Institute is currently working on. After expressing her gratitude and bidding him farewell, Mariana turned toward the mansion, her heart pounding with anxiety. Each step felt heavy, weighed down by the countless worries clouding her mind. But the moment she opened the door to the salon, her breath caught in her throat. There, standing before her, was Alencar, grinning from ear to ear. This can't be real, she gasped, joy flooding her expression. Tears welled up in her eyes as she whispered a prayer of thanks, overwhelmed with disbelief at the sight of her once bedridden patient now standing strong. How is this even possible? She stammered, barely able to contain her awe as Alencar slowly moved toward her. For months, Mariana had cared for Alencar, never once seeing him out of his bed, bound by the severity of his illness. But now, here he was, defying all odds, walking toward her with a strength she had never imagined. I can't believe my eyes, she cried, her voice trembling with happiness. She watched, her heart soaring, as Alencar approached her with steady steps, his face beaming with pride. He reached out and embraced her, holding her tightly as if trying to convey all the gratitude and emotions words could not express. Mara, he began, his voice rich and commanding. You've saved me more times than you realize, but there's so much more to our story that you're unaware of. Mariana pulled back slightly, her heart skipping a beat at the weight of his words. The seriousness in Alencar's gaze sent a shiver down her spine. She managed a small, unsure smile, trying to push away the unease creeping into her thoughts. What do you mean? Please, tell me, she urged, her voice soft but filled with anticipation. I've been trying to make sense of everything, but I still have so many unanswered questions. Who is your child? Were you able to save them? Alan Carr took a deep breath, his eyes glistening with unshed tears as he looked at Mariana. I have a daughter, he revealed, his voice thick with emotion. I didn't know about her until my health reached its breaking point. It took some time for me to get the confirmation I needed. But yes, I was able to save her. Mariana exhaled in relief, a wide smile spreading across her face as she felt the weight of uncertainty lift from her shoulders. I'm so grateful to see you here, alive and well, she murmured, her voice brimming with warmth. But then, Alan Carr's next words sent a jolt of shock through her. Daughter, he repeated softly, watching as Mariana's expression morphed from joy to astonishment. She blinked, unable to process what she had just heard. What did you say? She asked, her voice trembling with a mix of hope and disbelief. I must have misunderstood. But Alan Carr only smiled, a mixture of happiness and sorrow in his eyes as he stepped closer and gently took her into his arms again. You are my daughter, Mariana, my flesh and blood, he confessed, his voice filled with tenderness. Mariana's heart raced as his words sank in, tears spilling down her cheeks uncontrollably. How is this even possible? She sobbed, the overwhelming emotions crashing over her like a tidal wave. Are you talking about the time you asked me to pretend to be your daughter? Mariana asked hesitantly, her voice wavering with uncertainty. This had to be some sort of misunderstanding, she thought. Could this be true? Could her deepest, most cherished dream of finding a family finally becoming true? Alan Carr's smile softened, tinged with sadness. Yes, you are my daughter, he repeated with a voice that carried the weight of years of secrecy. I asked you to pretend because I thought my time was running out. I didn't want you to suffer the heartbreak of finding a father only to lose him again so quickly. When I learned that you grew up in an orphanage, desperately longing to find your father, I knew I couldn't burden you with the truth, especially when I believed I was on the brink of death. I'm so sorry, Mariana, for keeping this from you. I thought I was protecting you. Mariana's tears fell freely now as she stood there, trembling in Alan Carr's embrace. She had spent her entire life yearning for a family, dreaming of the day she would find her father. And now, here he was right in front of her. She had found him, and the truth was more beautiful and heartbreaking than she could have ever imagined. Mariana struggled to absorb every word Alan Carr shared, as each revelation tugged at emotions she hadn't fully understood until now. It was as if long-buried feelings were being unearthed, flooding her heart and mind all at once. Her voice trembled as she asked the next painful question. And what about my mother? What happened to her? How could you not have known that you were my father? Tears began to blur her vision, and she could barely hold them back. Alan Carr's gaze fell to the floor, a deep sadness etched into his features. Your mother! She didn't love me, he began, his voice heavy with regret. We were married, yes, but happiness was something that eluded us. She was never content with me. One day, she left, vanishing without a word, to start a new life with another man. I had no idea that she was carrying you when she disappeared. If I had known, Mariana, things would have turned out so differently for both of us. I would have never let you go. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. She left you at an orphanage right after you were born, he continued, his voice cracking under the strain of reliving the painful memories. But her life was cut short not long after that. Mariana could no longer hold back her tears. The sorrow of what could have been, what should have been, overwhelmed her. I wish things had been different too, she whispered, feeling the deep ache of loss for the mother she never knew and the years she lost with her father. I had a father all this time, a real father, she murmured, her voice filled with both sorrow and the bittersweet realization of what she had been denied for so long. Moved by her pain, Alan Carr approached his daughter, his arms wrapping around her in a protective embrace. But now, he said softly, we have each other. Finally, I have a family. I must thank God every day for this incredible gift, for bringing you into my life. His voice was thick with emotion, and for a moment, they both stood there, holding onto each other as if trying to make up for all the lost years in a single embrace. But Mariana's mind was still racing with questions. "How did you find out the truth?" she asked, her voice hesitant, afraid of what the answer might be. Alan Carr's expression turned serious, and the weight of what he was about to reveal pressed down on both of them. "Elena," he began, his tone filled with gravity. "She started looking into my affairs when she found out about my illness. She wanted to see if there was anyone who might inherit what I have. But she never told me about you. It was during one of my worst episodes when I was getting my medication that I saw your photograph. At that moment, something inside me just knew. You had the same face as your mother did when she was your age. I couldn't shake the feeling, so I hired a private investigator to find you. But even then, I wasn't completely sure if we were truly connected by blood." He took a deep breath, his eyes misting with tears. "I hired you because I was terrified that you might have the same illness I did. I couldn't bear the thought of you being alone, suffering without anyone to turn to." Elena was against it. She fought me every step of the way, and now I realize it was because she feared the truth would come out. She kept everything from me, hoping to protect me in case I wasn't your father after all. But I saw how she tried to get rid of you at every opportunity, and I refused to let her do that. I couldn't explain it, but something deep inside told me that you belonged here. While I waited for the test results, I didn't even realize you were suffering too. You hid your pain so well, and all the while, you were caring for me, even though you were sick yourself." He paused, overcome with emotion as tears streamed down his face. Mariana looked away, feeling a surge of embarrassment. "I didn't want you to worry about me," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper, ashamed of having hidden her struggles. She had buried her pain, prioritizing his needs over her own, never allowing herself to show weakness. "You are truly an angel in my life, Mariana," Alan Carr whispered, his voice thick with gratitude and emotion. He gazed at her with a deep tenderness that had grown out of both love and the realization of how much she had done for him. "But from now on, I want to know everything about you. Every little detail, every thought, every dream, every fear. I want to be part of your life in a way I couldn't before." He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to settle between them. "After all that has happened, after everything we've been through, I made a decision. I asked my medical team to focus on finding a cure to protect you, in case you ever fell ill like I did. That was my priority, not the paternity test. Whether the test confirmed it or not, you were already my daughter in my heart. Blood doesn't define family. You and I, we were bound long before the test results came in." Mariana felt tears welling up in her eyes as a warmth spread through her chest, filling the spaces where doubt and fear had once resided. A soft smile touched her lips, and she couldn't help but reflect on the countless days she had spent by Alan Carr's side, tending to him with unwavering care and affection. "I took care of you as if I had known all along that you were my father," she thought, recalling every moment she had nursed him through his illness, how her hands had gently wiped his brow, how she had whispered words of comfort in his darkest hours. Those days had been filled with a sense of purpose and meaning that she couldn't quite explain at the time. But now, everything seemed to fall into place. The connection she had felt, the unspoken bond. They had been real, more real than she had ever imagined. But just as she was basking in the warmth of these revelations, Alan Carr's expression shifted, his eyes darkening with a heavy seriousness that replaced the tenderness of moments before. His face grew tense as he prepared to share something that weighed heavily on his heart. When the DNA results came in, he began, his voice tinged with regret. "I realized that time was slipping through my fingers. I didn't have the luxury to sit you down and explain everything without risking breaking your heart. I couldn't bear the thought of telling you the truth, only to have you lose me shortly after. But the tests uncovered something far more sinister than I had ever expected. Elena, the woman who I thought was by my side, had been secretly drugging me. She was intentionally making my condition worse, all so she could secure my inheritance for herself." His voice trembled with the weight of the betrayal, and he paused, wiping away the tears that had started to fall. The pain in his eyes was undeniable, a reflection of the immense hurt and disbelief he was still grappling with. Mariana's heart sank as she listened to his confession. The idea that someone could be so cruel, so calculating, was almost too much to bear. She felt a wave of anger rise within her, mingling with the sadness and relief that were already swirling in her chest. Elena's treachery had stolen so much time, trust, and nearly the chance to truly know the father she had longed for her entire life. The discovery about Elena shattered me, Alencar admitted, his voice thick with sorrow. It broke me in ways I didn't think were possible. But in that pain, I found strength, a determination to protect you, my only true heir, from the same fate. I refused to let anyone take away what rightfully belonged to you, Mariana. His words were filled with a fierce resolve, but even as he spoke them, Mariana could see the vulnerability in his eyes. He had been through so much and the wounds were still fresh. For Mariana, the revelations were overwhelming. Relief washed over her as the mysteries of her past were finally coming to light. Yet beneath that relief simmered a potent mix of emotions. Anger at Elena's betrayal, sorrow for the years she had lost, and gratitude for the chance to finally know the truth. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself as she processed everything. "And now?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt inside. "What will we do about Elena? How do we move forward from this?" There was no doubt in her mind that justice needed to be served, but the path ahead seemed uncertain, filled with lingering questions and unresolved emotions. Alencar's gaze met hers, and in his eyes, she saw a burning determination that reassured her. "Dr. Enrique collected blood samples from me while I was recovering in the hospital," he explained, his voice growing more resolute with each word. "We have all the proof we need to hold Elena accountable for what she's done. The evidence is undeniable. Her lawyers were already preparing for me to sign over everything, ready to pounce the moment I showed any weakness. But now justice has caught up with her. Elena has been arrested, and she will face the consequences of her actions. She won't escape punishment for the pain she's caused. Not to me, and certainly not to you." His voice was strong and unwavering, filled with a quiet but powerful sense of justice. The knowledge that Elena would be held accountable brought a sense of closure, yet it didn't erase the pain of what had been lost. Mariana felt a mix of emotions swirling within her. Relief that justice had been served, but also a lingering sadness for the years of deception and betrayal. As she stood there with her father, the man she had longed to know for so long, she realized that this was just the beginning. Their journey together would be one of healing, of rebuilding the family they had both dreamed of. It wouldn't be easy, but with Alencar by her side, she knew they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. For the first time in her life, Mariana felt the warmth of a true family, a love that was stronger than any betrayal, a bond that could withstand anything life threw their way. "But what about your illness?" Mariana asked, her voice tinged with worry, unable to shake the lingering fear that something might still go wrong. "Is the cure you mentioned definitively? Can we truly put all of this behind us?" Alencar's face softened as he looked at his daughter. A slight smile formed on his lips, a glimmer of hope lighting up his weary features. "Ah, yes, the cure," he said, his voice calm but filled with optimism. "Our medical team worked tirelessly, and they did find a cure. The medication you administered to me during my worst moments was part of that ongoing effort. Thank God. It not only saved me but also protected you. I knew that in my condition time was against me, but miraculously, the treatment began working just in time. We're cured, Mariana. You and I were free from this illness. We have a future, my daughter, a whole life ahead of us." Mariana felt an immense wave of relief wash over her, a joy so profound that it brought tears to her eyes. "This is incredible," she exclaimed, her voice catching in her throat. "So, there's hope for both of us?" She smiled through her tears, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Yes," Alencar affirmed with a bright smile of his own. "There is hope, and more than that, there is a future waiting for us. I've even booked our tickets for when you're discharged from the hospital. We'll start fresh together." His eyes sparkled with a newfound vitality that Mariana had never seen before. "Could you hear me while you were in a coma?" she asked excitedly, leaning in closer to him, eager to hear his answer. "Yes, my daughter," Alencar replied, his voice full of warmth and love. "I heard every word you said. Your voice kept me grounded and kept me fighting when I was ready to let go. And now, I'll do everything in my power to make sure we have that special day at the beach and many, many more after that." Mariana nodded, her eyes shining with a mixture of gratitude, love, and relief. "Thank you, Dad, for everything," she whispered, her heart swelling as she called him Dad for the first time. The word felt right, natural, as if she had been waiting her whole life to say it. Alencar, too, was overwhelmed with emotion. His eyes glistened with tears as he heard the word father spoken by his daughter. "I thank you, Mariana. I'm so happy to finally have you in my life. You are the greatest gift I could have ever received." In the days that followed their emotional reunion, Mariana and Alencar worked together to not only strengthen their newfound bond, but to also face the legal challenges that Elena had left in her wake. The truth about Elena's schemes came to light in court, and justice prevailed. Elena was sentenced to prison, where she would serve time for her heinous attempts to steal Alencar's inheritance and endanger his health. The darkness that had once loomed over their lives began to fade, replaced by the bright light of hope and healing. With his health noticeably improving, thanks to the medical innovation that had saved him, Alencar fulfilled his promise to Mariana. They spent an unforgettable day at the beach, basking in the sun, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore providing a soothing backdrop to their laughter and conversation. They celebrated not only Alencar's recovery, but also the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. It was a day filled with joy, deep talks about the future, and dreams of what was yet to come. A day that marked the start of many more special moments they would share as father and daughter. For Mariana, this new chapter meant more than just having a family. It meant embracing a future she had never dared to dream of. She decided to use her own experiences to help others who had once been in her shoes, children who longed for a family, and who yearned for a sense of belonging. She started a charity dedicated to supporting orphans, providing them with the love and care that she had once craved so deeply. The work gave her life a new purpose, and she poured her heart into it, determined to make a difference. The story of Mariana and Alencar became an inspiration to many, a beacon of hope in a world that often seemed dark and unforgiving. Their journey was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, showing that even in the face of betrayal and suffering, new beginnings can emerge from the most unexpected places. Their love, their bond, and their shared strength became a powerful reminder that family is not always defined by blood, but by the love and connection that we choose to nurture and protect. And as they stood side by side, ready to face whatever life had in store for them, both Mariana and Alencar knew that they had found something precious, something that would last forever. They had found each other, and with that, they had found hope, healing, and the promise of a brighter future. As we bring this heartfelt journey to a close, we hope that Mariana and Alencar's story has touched you as deeply as it has touched us. Their path from darkness to light, from separation to family, is a powerful reminder that even in our most difficult moments, hope and healing are possible. But now, we turn to you. What have you learned from this incredible tale of love, resilience, and redemption? We invite you to reflect and share in the comments below. What is one thing from this story that has inspired you, and how will you bring that lesson into your own life? Your thoughts and experiences matter, and we'd love to hear what resonated with you. If this story moved you, please take a moment to leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can continue to share stories that inspire, uplift, and remind us of the incredible strength within each of us. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to reading your insights.